to their credit, did not work very hard to try to shut that stuff down. They sort of treated it in a light way. Well, my dad more than my mom treated it in a light way, just kind of like, well, kids will be kids. I'm sure they'll be, coming back to the church in no time right now that, meanwhile we might criticize a few tapes that he has. Should you really be listening to that? But anyway, I really think music, and then a little bit later, just literature in general. That was my major in college. We had a literature of the Bible class, which was a real gift because that was my sort of default way of reading the Bible anyway. I just didn't know it was allowed. And that was at a Christian college, by the way, literature of the Bible. And it's like they had a gateway drug there in the middle of the curriculum that no one knew, like that there is another way to read the Bible. So, and starting to have friends that were outside my worldview. Catholics we thought were going to hell when I was a kid. And when by the time I was in junior high, I had 2 Catholic neighbors. I was like, wait a minute, I don't believe this, And then we had a gay couple move into the neighborhood, and that I was a terrible junior high boy who would mock them. But that was the beginning of some self-critique. Do I really think that gay people are somehow wrong or bad or sinful or any worse than I am, So anyway, I'm just describing life experience much more than I read a book and I started changing my mind. Go ahead.
Isn't that the way it always works?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. You know how many times I've tried to give a book to someone and say, hey, you should read this. And they're like, yeah, not convincing,
Yeah.
As soon as they have a gay friend, then all of a sudden they're like, oh, well actually, now that you mention it, my friend Tim is fine. That's what it takes.
It's just, and all the energy that we tend to spend on trying to convince people to see it differently, when in reality it's just getting people around the table.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what I've found is like literally, can we all have dinner together?
Mm-hmm.
And it really begins to change the game. What you said music. I'm one of those people who music is such a huge part of my life, and I'm so not talented.
Mm-hmm.
But what were some of the bands that were opening you up?
I was just straight grunge rock and roll, man. I mean, I listened to, I don't know, Pearl Jam and Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Soundgarden and all these Seattle bands, and then a few obscure ones beneath that. And before that, it was Motley Crue and Bon Jovi, who Bon Jovi is still freaking awesome. So I was a little bit mainstream, I'd say, in my musical taste. But then I got into like, the Grateful Dead and Jimi Hendrix, and this mainly because it was cool, I think, at the time. But this is just a whole universe that made me feel alive. And I was in bands, and I started writing music. And I think music for many people, maybe for most people, is it's the easiest path to taste some transcendence. What I mean by that is something of your ego, who you think you are in the world, is transcended a bit. You're lifted into a world, and especially if you play music like you're in a band, you're a participant in this thing that's flowing. You're doing it, and you're also not doing it. That's an experience of transcendence. And I started to experience that, and that was outside the what was acceptable, where we should be singing whatever, I don't know, Amazing Grace or something, which is a terrible melody line, really, if you're just honest about it. It's like so boring. Although that's the cheap side of music. There's also the sacred side, Bach. You can't mess with Bach and the sacred music that has existed for hundreds of years, really. Pearl Jam can't touch it. Anyway,
I have a vivid memory of being in the car with my parents, and having an argument with my dad about why I wanted to listen to "Whoop There It Is" by Tag Team instead of Southern Gospel Band. I just remember
Yeah.
that, having that sort of like that tension of, I don't like Southern gospel music. I
Yeah.
want to listen to Tag Team.
Yeah. That's hilarious. Tag team. Yeah.
Uh,
My parents, when I said I was going to start buying music, they're like, well, as long as this went on for one time, they're like, well, your dad has to approve it. It's like, okay. So I started with the Beach Boys. That was my first tape. It was approved. And then it never happened again. It's like they wanted to like step in and be parents, and they're like, actually, this is going to be really hard. So we'll just let it go.
do you remember? This is totally irrelevant. Do you remember what the first CD you bought was that you had?
Not really. First tapes, plural, were, um, maybe I'm probably older than you, so it was like, well, the Beach Boys, and then New Kids on the Block,
Yep.
and Milli Vanilli. I had those three tapes, and then from there it was like straight into Metallica. Like enough Milli Vanilli, we'll go Metallica. We'll go Motley Crue. So
The first tape I remember, there's two that I remember. One was like a mixed. It was the "We Are the World," like whatever "We Are the World" was on. And maybe it was
yeah,
just a single. I remember listening to that every night going to bed. And then there was this mixtape that had Ghostbusters and "Celebrate Good Times Come On," like that sort of. Those are the first
yeah,
CD I had. I got it for my birthday one year. It was a Garth Brooks CD. I was a
totally.
huge Garth Brooks fan back in the late
Yeah,
80s, early 90s.
I like when he was like Chris Gaines for a while. Wasn't
Oh,
that like his
no.
alter ego? Like, he kind of looked like he was in the Goo Goo Dolls there for about 6 months.
That was a weird
Freaking awesome,
time.
man.
It was a weird time.
That was his midlife crisis. Yeah.
I'm going to say this. That album actually had a couple of decent songs on it.
I'm sure it did. Garth Brooks can write songs. No one can deny
I,
that.
yeah.
Or
So
Chris Gaines.
Chris Gaines is that. I'm a huge U2 fan, and there've
Uh-huh.
been some eras when Bono would do some alter egos in concert. I don't know if you like
Yeah.
Pop Mart tour. I think it was. He had this
Hmm.
character called McFeasto, where he would, and people just thought Bono had lost. Like we don't get what he's doing, and
Yeah.
so yeah, music has always been one of those things for me. Um, so you lived in Israel for a while, okay,
Uh-huh.
right?
Yeah.
So what led you on that track? What because just reading your book and some of those stories, that obviously was such a forming time for you. Those
Yeah.
experiences. So
Yeah.
how did you end up in Israel?
Well, as soon late college, I was a part of a church, an evangelical free church, and it was a really life-giving place. It was the first time I felt like this feels like a home church, like I can move around in these walls. And we were reading Dallas Willard. We were talking about postmodernity. It was an intellectually rich place, and they had great music. My friend Scott wrote all the music, and um, coming out of that, I felt like, yeah, I want to make a difference in the church world. I want to start something new or be a part of something new. And at that, it was right then that Mars Hill started. So Rob Bell started Mars Hill, and I moved back to Michigan, and then did the music there for the first 4 years. And during that 4-year period, Rob and I and others started reading and were exposed to historical Jesus stuff, very simple things like Jesus was a Jew, very simple things like Passover was, you know, there were certain rites and rituals around Passover in the first century, and so forth and so on. And that, for some reason, just like blew the doors off my world, because I realized, and this is what I was saying at the time, I don't know. I don't know anything about the Bible. That was a feeling I had. I don't know what's in this thing. I don't know about the cultural context. I feel like you were saying earlier, maybe I feel cheated, like what the heck? And so I just started reading everything I could get my hands on about Judaism, first century stuff, scholarly things, popular things. And I went to Israel for the first time, and I got the bug of the land and culture, and I thought, I have to leave church. This is my first leaving. I have to leave this mega church thing And I was kind of getting sick of the music anyway. I'm not a great musician. I just thought it was fun, basically. And so that's when I moved to Israel. I said, I'm going to find out for myself, what is this book? What happened between, who was the historical Jesus, and what happened between that figure and what we call early Christianity? I just became obsessed with that. And so I moved to Israel I had just one kid at the time with my wife and daughter. And it was like a crazy freaking dangerous time to be there. But the courses, classes, and the people we met and friends was really eye-opening, life-giving, challenging, disorienting. Yeah, so that's what happened. And then I was there for like 3 years and eventually came back. Yeah.
So I would just imagine, I think in some ways one might think going to Israel would, I'm going to go there, I'm going to solidify my faith and solidify what I believe. And you know what I'm saying? Like that sense
Mm-hmm.
of being there will just prove everything I've been told has been right.
Yeah.
I'll be closer connected to it. I mean, it seems like just reading your book, like when you go up to Mount Sinai, which you talk about in your book, you're searching for something.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, did being there give you less? Like, people don't talk about solid footing, right? Like I've got solid footing, which I don't even think is a real thing, but at the time, in the past, I did. So did it make you feel even more sort of like, gosh, I don't know what's going on, but like just being there?
Yeah, it was a time of total unraveling of what I thought faith was. Not in one shot, but just slowly but surely. Some of it was just life itself, the difficulties of living in a foreign country. Some of it was the material I was studying, the people I was meeting. But it was destabilizing. Yeah, it was by the time I was on Mount Sinai, I was unsure about everything. Although I still had a genuine desire, like, what is this thing? Who are you, God? Who who is this Jesus? How am I related to the divine in any way? Am I even a person of faith anymore? I didn't know. The one gift of it, well, there are many gifts of it. One gift was that graduate school is a great place to explore. It's not a church environment. It's not. I was free. I felt free in a way I had never felt in my life. I can read whatever, I could think whatever I want, even though I was unsure of what I thought. And that was super, super life-giving. So it was like exciting and disorienting at the same time. And a lot of people, like I still lead trips to Israel. And my experience is that two things happen at the same time. Something about what you thought faith or the story is pulled apart. You cannot help it. And the other side is it also feels more real in one way. And those things happening simultaneously. Real in the sense of this is a real place, a real figure who did real things at a real time period. And if you know a little bit about the time period, it's not a fairy tale anymore.
Right.
But, and the big but is, what I thought faith was, or what I thought the whole thing was about, is not what I thought. At least and I think it's like parallel tracks happening at the same time, potentially.
So you lived there for 3 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you came back.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like coming back to America after? I mean, I'm sure you'd visited in between there, right? But like, what was it like coming and being back here all the time?
Well, for a while, I couldn't get used to the fact that America's a relatively safe place. Relatively. I was used to going into cafes and shops and worrying about where's a safe place to sit in case there's a suicide bombing, or not getting on a bus, or I became very good at telling the difference between a Palestinian and an Israeli Jew. And that's not a good feeling. You're sizing up all the time. And that took a long time to